What is up, guys? Well, we are officially past Thanksgiving 2024. I hope everybody had a great holiday. I hope everybody had a great dinner. And I hope everybody watched some awesome movies. Now, a movie that is synonymous with Thanksgiving for me is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. And it's not only a film that I watch every single year on Thanksgiving, no matter what. Come hell or high water, I could have a power outage. I will go buy a generator just to watch this movie. That's how much I love it. But it's genuinely one of my favorite comedies of all time. It's in like my top 3 or top 5. And I always find myself very intimidated when I go to review my favorite films of all time. I'm not sure if it's the fact that because I love it so much, I fear I can't be as critical of it as I should. I'm kind of blinded to any potential flaws or things that could be done better in it. I don't know if it's because there's just so much that I want to talk about that I fear I'm just going to ramble. So this is probably going to be more of a relaxed review, much more of a casual just conversation, a celebration of the movie than a lot of my more standard reviews. But that's just kind of the way that my brain works when I'm talking about a movie that means as much to me as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles does. So this was the 5th film written and directed by the great John Hughes, one of the kings of the 80s. Up to this point, somebody who had pretty much made a reputation for himself as being the teen angst guy. He had done 16 Candles, he had done Breakfast Club, he had done Weird Science and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So Planes, Trains, and Automobiles was a very different type of movie for John Hughes. Not focused on teenagers, not focused on coming of age or the high school culture, focusing on just two people of extreme different personalities trying to get home for the holidays. And also the first time that he's directing a cast that is led by two comedy titans of the time, Steve Martin and John Candy. He was not working with up-and-coming teenage actors. These are people that already have a body of work, already have a style, already have expectations from their fans and their audience. So there was a lot of things that was a very new ventured territory for John Hughes in this movie. And for those that haven't seen it, and I highly encourage you to check it out, the story of this film is you have Steve Martin, who is like this business exec. He's a kind of a regular Joe that is trying to get home for the holidays, trying to get to Chicago, Illinois. And you have John Candy, who plays Del Griffith, who is kind of this talkative, overly friendly, borderline annoying person that he gets sat next to on this plane. And a bunch of different obstacles start to happen that prevent Steve Martin from getting home and keep linking him back together with Del Griffith, with John Candy's character. The plane can't land in Chicago because of bad weather. They go onto a train and the train breaks down. They go onto a bus and their tickets are only good for so far. They rent a car and absolutely destroy it. They get in the back of a milk truck. I mean, every single possible thing. They get robbed in the middle of the night, prevents them from achieving their goal of getting home. And all the while, it's all about how they come to understand each other and even kind of love each other for their differences while overcoming all these trials and tribulations. And it's actually one of the very few movies out there that are Thanksgiving classics. So many holiday films, the overwhelming majority of them are all Christmas. And there's even a lot of people out there that mistake this movie for a Christmas film. They watch it in December because it just has that holiday movie vibe. But this one is a Thanksgiving film, which is hence the reason that I watch it every Thanksgiving. This along with Dutch, which is another film I should review at some point. And it's become a mainstay and a yearly watch for so many of us because not only is it just such a fun and genuinely hilarious movie, but it's also very heartwarming and it really captures the spirit of the holiday, the spirit of giving to somebody, the spirit of what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about. And we're going to unpack the multitude of reasons why I adore this film so much. But really quick before we dive into Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, while Neil Page and Del Griffith go through a ton of discomfort on their journey in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, you will never have discomfort at your gaming station or your office if you check out the sponsor of today's video, eWin Racing. This is actually the 4th eWin gaming chair that I've owned over the last couple of years, and this brand new revolutionary series is the biggest and best upgrade yet. Just like the previous models, you still got the carbon steel frame with the premium leather covering. You got a 155-degree incline as well as a multi-tilt mechanism, which lets you change from having a solid back or being able to tilt all the way back. But with the new Revolutionary Edition chairs, they bring you a whole list of new features. Like now, eWin uses a cold cure foam that is actually pressure sensitive and temperature sensitive, which means it not only reacts and adapts to your body's weight, but also your body heat, keeping you cool during those long gaming sessions or those long editing sessions. There's even a new 4D lumbar support system so that you can fully adapt the chair to your spine. And out with the old and in with the new, with the 4D adjustable armrest no longer being plastic and now being fully metal, and coming with an interchangeable magnetic top system. So if you decide one day that you want to take these off and change them to a different color to fit your style, it's as easy as that. But probably my favorite upgrade are the pillows, with the lumbar cushion being even softer and filled with high-density foam to keep your back comfortable. But especially this new head pillow, which ditches the old strap system for a completely new magnetic system. It's softer, it's got the high-density foam as well, and I love being able to adjust it fully no matter where I'm sitting in this chair. And eWin puts a high priority on making their chairs available and comfortable for absolutely everybody, which is why they designed their chairs to support people up to 6'5" and 400 pounds. And while I unfortunately neglected to grab footage while I was unboxing this, the new packaging of these chairs is a complete improvement, with all of the tools and hardware individually packaged, all of the parts having foam shadow boxes, and an instruction sheet that is not only huge, but very easy to follow. So if you want to upgrade your work and gaming station with the best chairs available, go to the link in the video description and use my code CODY30 for 30% off of your purchase. And be sure to act fast so that you can take advantage of the Black Friday sale that is going on right now. And thank you so much to eWin for the awesome chairs and for sponsoring today's video. Starting off with the positives for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, ultimately I just love what this movie stands for, which is understanding each other, which is coming to some sort of grips with your fellow man, especially in today's climate where we're being told, at least, that we are more divided than ever. The movie's message about having two people that seem like they just have absolutely nothing in common, there's no reason why they should spend more than 10 seconds around each other, being put through all of these tests that life throws in front of them and come to realize the things that they value about each other's differences, much like you do in a relationship. Very few of us marry or get into a relationship with somebody that has all the same exact traits, strengths, and flaws as us. Usually we find a bit of a compliment there. And it's the same type of dynamic here, where you have Steve Martin's character of Neil Page, who is very straight man, very deliberate, to the point. He wants to get home, doesn't really care too much about anything else. He's a little bit more upper class. And you have Del Griffith, who's one of those people that is just very free-spirited, overly friendly, talkative. Every little story that he has to tell, he wants to tell you. He wants to bond. He wants to be overly helpful and just continue to engage with you, even if you're giving him all the social cues that you're really not into everything. And while the first half or so of the movie, and even spots throughout the second half of the film, it just seems like these guys are never going to understand each other. They're never going to get along. And for as much as Steve Martin is the one who is very abrasive and combative with John Candy's personality, even some elements in the second half have John Candy pushing back on all of that. Like, why are you so aggravated about me? Like, I'm just trying to be friendly. Like, what is it that I do? Like, why do you think you're so perfect? And them airing out all of these issues and yet getting through all of these trials and tribulations because of each other's strengths and having to lean on each other here and there is what ultimately leads them to become friends, and ultimately leads to the very heartwarming conclusion of the movie, which is Steve Martin coming to the certain realizations about John Candy's character and accepting him as a friend. And then you presume after the credits roll, he's going to do something to help him, and they're going to be these lifelong friends, which is just it's a really heartwarming note to end on for a holiday film. Bringing people together, getting home for the holidays, but also giving back to somebody and giving something of yourself that you normally wouldn't because of the spirit of the holidays. And that element only works because of the genius of Steve Martin and John Candy. You have two comedy titans, as I said earlier, who have very different styles of comedy that were known for very different types of movies. And you could tell that they were two comedy geniuses that just took this script that was already very funny on the page and tried to elevate it with their own style, tried to bring their own personalities very much to these characters. And Del Griffith and Neil Page do feel like kind of the exaggerated personalities of these two actors in a lot of ways, almost like they're playing themselves or playing into their on-screen personas that they're known for. And also just riffing back and forth. There's a lot of improv. There was a lot of multiple takes and a lot of variations of dialogue exchanges that were filmed. This thing went notoriously long for a comedy, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. But the reason why you buy into these two characters, you invest yourself, despite them being two personality potential caricatures that most people would not like as their leads of a movie, somebody who's an absolute tight-ass, abrasive person and somebody who is this aloof buffoon who can't shut up. Like, the extreme caricature versions of those could be characters that would turn off any audience member immediately and go, why do I care enough to spend 90 minutes with these characters, let alone give a shit where they end up at by the end of this story? And I think it's that earnestness, it's that genuineness that you get out of these two performances that makes you really invest yourself in these two characters, really invest yourself in how they are going to start to get along and what it's going to take for them to get along.
Have mercy. I've been wearing the same underwear since Tuesday.
I can vouch for that.
And there's this constant kind of push and pull where you have Steve Martin that's like understandably frustrated. Like, you as an audience member are kind of getting annoyed with John Candy, but then he goes a little bit too far. And then you get the great scene with John Candy talking about, you want to hurt me? Go ahead. If it makes you feel any better, I'm an easy target. And then all of a sudden, as an audience member, you pull back, just like Steve Martin. You're like, ooh, okay, yeah, he's a nice guy. This isn't cool. We can't treat him like he's a pariah. And then you have the times with John Candy's character where he starts to get a little too aloof, but then he brings it back with one of those dramatic scenes, or brings it back by, offering to pay for the train ticket, or having the little scam where he's selling all of these shower curtain rings as earrings to get them money so that they can get out of the situation that they're in. And so you start to pull back on how much he's frustrated, and you're like, okay, you know what? Kind of like this guy. He's got a little bit more going for him than just his wild personality. And it's just this constant back and forth that you have with these characters that pushes it just to the point of almost being caricature, but them having the restraint to pull back enough to keep them grounded, to keep you invested in them. This is also one of those great examples of just good old-fashioned wholesome comedy. This is not a movie that relies on raunch or shock value or any extreme visuals, things that comedy kind of started to rely on a lot more in my generation, and then all of a sudden all of that was taboo, and so now comedy just pretty much ceases to exist. But this is back when you would just have situational humor. You would have character interactions. You have the personalities and the performances of the two lead actors. Like, even just something as Steve Martin sitting on the plane and Del Griffith won't shut up, and him just like crawling out of his skin makes me laugh every single time that I see it, just because of the way that Steve Martin exhibits frustration. But all of the situations, them waking up in the morning, hands between two pillows, or being robbed and having them both find out in the middle of a diner, or the car going down the wrong side of the road. Like, how does he know where we're going? Yeah, he's drunk. It's like all these different situations that are so grounded and relatable enough, with just that little bit of turning it up for comedy's sake, that keeps this thing so wholesome. And it's because they went for that style of humor that this has become literally a timeless classic, because the style of humor, the reason why Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is so funny, never gets old. It never ages. It never turns into something where it feels like that used to be funny, but we're past that nowadays. Having relatable, grounded situations that we can all have some sort of a parallel memory that feels like we've been through something like that is what makes it so relatable and timeless. And then if you like a little edge in your comedy, this is certainly one of the edgiest, if not the edgiest, John Hughes film, specifically just because of the rant at the rental car company where Steve Martin just goes off and says fuck like 72 times. So it's a movie that does have that little bit of adult edge in there. There's a few other little jokes that ride the line. John Candy giving Steve Martin shit for playing with his balls too much, that it's got enough of that adult edge in there, but it's still very much a a family movie just with a little bit of bite, a little extra something.
I want a fucking car right fucking now.
And while I've talked about it a little bit, the movie is also very brilliant with the way that it balances the comedy and the silliness with genuine heartfelt drama, with these gut punch moments, with these sentimental moments. That's a very hard balance to have because one can very easily overtake the other. You could have a movie that is so over the top and silly that when you try to get serious, it's laughable. You can have a movie that goes too over the top when it's trying to be sentimental and you kind of kill any bit of aloof joy that everybody is having, and all of a sudden now they're sad in a movie that they wanted to be happy with. And this movie strikes that perfect balance where it just knows the right moments and it's intended to pull the audience back. You have these built up relationships with these two characters. You have what your thoughts have been established to be on these characters. And then you get these sentimental moments that bring you down a bit, that kind of reset the levels a little bit. The scene where Steve Martin just lays into John Candy in the hotel room, the scene where they're bonding over their love for their wives, the scene at the end where Steve Martin comes to the realization of certain things that John Candy has said, certain times when he was silent, and John Candy admitting kind of the true nature of himself with just 2 sentences, just 2 lines of dialogue. All of these moments don't kill the fun and the joy of the film. They just bring you something else that makes you hold on to this all the more and makes you value what this movie stands for all the more, besides the great moments of comedy. And funny enough, I think the biggest strength of this movie, which is something that I don't really get to talk about too often, is that I genuinely think Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a film that is only a classic because of the editing. And it was quite literally saved by the editing. Paul Hirsch was the editor of this film, and you look at his filmography, and he's clearly like this legend, this unsung legend in Hollywood. You have things from some of the Mission Impossible movies to Falling Down to some other John Hughes films, Secret of My Success. I mean, going all the way, Ray, Oscar-nominated, Oscar-winning Ray. He's got tons of credits out there, but he is literally the savior of this movie. Because with the situation that John Hughes was in, where he's undertaking this very new film, he's got these 2 huge stars, these huge comedic personalities that he wants to get all these multiple takes and different angles. And they shot this thing for about 3 times, maybe even more of a schedule that a comedy typically takes. Like 25, 30 days is what your average comedy would shoot in. And this film shot for almost 90 days, which rivals most like blockbuster films with huge set pieces and action set pieces and explosions. And this is just a movie about guys going across the country and a lot of dialogue. And so it was a film that the rough cut, the very first assembled cut of this movie was 3 hours and 45 minutes long. And you had one man that had to sift through all of this footage and figure out how to make a movie out of this, what to keep, what to get rid of, what to trim, what to rearrange to make this the best possible version of itself.
I want you to help him up.
No! My pleasure.
And a lot of times editing gets very easily overlooked. Like you have a lot of movies nowadays where people stick to kind of a canned response of saying it has pacing issues. It was paced poorly. It was slow burn, which is kind of a more educated way of saying it was boring. You have a lot of those nowadays that is an issue that kind of falls on the editing. It's the editing which gives the movie its life. It gives the movie its pace. It gives the movie its forward momentum. And so you had a film that is 90 minutes in the version that all of us know and love that was originally 3 hours and 45 minutes. And you even hear Paul Hirsch describe some of the dailies that he had to look through, which is the footage they shot during that day that they pass off to the editor. And he would have 3 to 4 hours of reels of just reaction shots of just like the scene at the end of the movie with Steve Martin on a train as he's like looking left and giving a confused look and, you know, looking back and laughing about something. 4 hours of that from multiple angles, just piling up piling up every single day of 85 days that they shot this for him to sift through and figure out what's the best shot, what's the best storyline, which story beats need to be cut, what needs to be trimmed, what subplots can we let go of, what are integral to the story. And it's only because of the choices that he made alongside John Hughes that this movie is as successful as it is, because every single thing that happened in the production of this movie nowadays would be all over the internet. It would be all over Twitter, and this thing would be pretty much branded a disaster before anybody saw a single frame of it. They would be talking about, oh, it's reshoots, it's not testing well, all the things that we hear nowadays for movies where people just write it off immediately, and even if they save it, they pretty much know how they feel about it before they watch it. A lot of the comedic scenes in the film were originally much longer than they were. There was actually a Fathom event that I went to with my father, I think 2 years ago, where before the movie played, they assembled together a deleted scene of just the beginning of the movie where Steve Martin is sitting there with John Candy on the plane, and where he's, talking about, hey, Neil Page, how are you? I'm Del Griffith. I sell, shower curtain rings. What do you do? That's the scene you have in the movie. And the version that we saw is just kind of like a thing for fans, was like 8 minutes long of John Candy just riffing, just bringing up random things. And it showed just the comedic genius of John Candy, but it also showed, like, even as a fan, you're sitting there for like 8 minutes going, my God, this is going on forever. And almost every sequence of this movie was that before Paul Hirsch got his hands on it. There was a subplot about Steve Martin's wife not believing all of the stories that he's giving her about why he can't get home and assuming that he's having an affair. There was an extended plot regarding the guy that steals from them in the hotel, and he's a pizza delivery boy, and he's the one that puts the beer on the vibrating bed that you hear Steve Martin bitching about when they're laying in bed. You'll notice at the last reels of the movie that John Candy has a black eye that's unexplained. There was a whole plot in there where after their busted ass car gets seized, that John Candy reveals that he was trying to save Steve Martin some money and didn't get the insurance on the car, and so he clocks him. And it just goes on and on and on and on about all these things that filled out a 3 hour and 45 minute rough cut. And so after a ton of labor intensive editing, they finally got a cut of the movie that was under 2 hours. And they started to screen it for audiences less than a month before this thing was supposed to be locked and in theaters. And one test screening after another, people did not like the movie. Some people were walking out of it. And Paul Hirsch, especially, who thought that he had assembled this like greatest comedy of all time, was just shocked. And come to find out, it was one scene in the film that they had edited out because it seemed like it was pointless that made all the difference in the world. The biggest complaint that they were getting from the test screenings was that nobody liked the characters. Nobody liked how annoying John Candy was, and nobody liked the fact that Steve Martin just tolerated it. They thought that John Candy was a freeloader that was just mooching off of this guy to get all this free travel and bus fare and train tickets, and that Steve Martin was an idiot for never calling it out, never doing anything about it. And it's because the scene in the movie where they first part ways about a third, halfway through the film, where John Candy looks at Steve Martin and says, hey, I need your address. I gotta pay you back for this ticket. And Steve Martin says, ticket's a gift. Because he just honestly just doesn't want to deal with John Candy anymore. But still, just ticket's a gift. Don't worry about it. Happy holidays. That scene was cut out of the original test screening cut, because it felt like, well, what do we need to know this for? Like, okay, they're getting on the train. He wants to pay for him. He doesn't want it. Like, it's just dead air. Take it out. And that one scene showing how earnest John Candy's character was and wanting to pay him back, and also showing the grace with a little bit of annoyance of Steve Martin of, don't worry about it, man, it's a gift, makes all the difference. Because when they put it back into the film, suddenly every test screening after that started to track wonderfully. And that story just teaches you so much about film editing and how important that is, and how many movies out there we've seen where there's some issue. There's just something that doesn't work there. And how many of those could have been fixed by taking out one line of dialogue even, or putting in one small scene like that, fundamentally changing the movie. And even after they had figured that out, even after they started to test well, they still had an issue with the ending of the movie not working for anybody. There was a clip that was going viral, I think last holiday season, where Steve Martin was talking about planes, trains, and automobiles. I think it was a documentary that he was either just in a segment of, but he took off, I think, the script of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from his bookshelf, and he was talking about the movie. He's talking about John Candy and how he just loved him. It was one of his best friends. And he was describing how the original script, the ending of the movie where John Candy confesses to Steve Martin's character, was originally significantly longer. It was a whole monologue. And it was like one of the best, like, dramatic performance moments of John Candy that Steve Martin had ever seen.
Says, I sort of attach myself to people from time to time, like with you, especially around the holidays. I can take it in March, July, October, but it gets hard. And then he said, this time I couldn't let go.
And everybody, myself included, saw that clip and went, what? I want to see that monologue. Like, why would we have cut that? Why would you cut that? Like, where is it? And then you hear the story from the editor of the film's perspective. And the original ending of this film, up to the point of Steve Martin getting on this L train for that final stretch to go home and John Candy staying in the station, is the same. But he takes the train all the way to the final destination, gets off of the train, and trips over the footlocker of John Candy, and Del Griffith is there again. And he's like, Del, what are you doing here? Like, you said you were going home. What are you doing here? And then you get the monologue of John Candy confessing everything and saying, the extended part of it was like, I latch on to people. And the reactions that they were getting was laughter, because the ridiculousness of the situation of this guy is still here overshadowed all of the great dramatic work that was going on with John Candy. And so they were just stuck in at absolute loss of, like, how do we salvage this ending? Like, narratively, we know this is where we want to go, but something's not working here. And then Paul Hirsch thought back to the first couple of packs of dailies that he was getting, these 3-4 hour segments of film of just Steve Martin giving reaction shots on this train. And they came up with the idea of, let's actually use that. And that's the ending you have in the film, where he goes, leaves John Candy's character, and he just gives all these reactions that are edited and framed in a way to elicit him looking back fondly on some of the craziness and the hijinks of their trip, and then starting to be puzzled and start to think twice about certain things and starting to analyze things that John Candy's character said and times where he was silent, and putting it all together and then choosing to go back. And they even play the footage of the train leaving that station in reverse because they only had one shot of it to show it coming back to that station. And then you get the version that we get, which is all cut down to 2 lines of dialogue. It's no longer a monologue. It's just, I don't have a home. Marie's been dead for 8 years. And that's all it needed. And then you immediately cut to Steve Martin's reaction to the original part of the ending, where he's just listening to this monologue, and you just put the reaction in there, and then it cuts to the happy music of them carrying the footlocker to Steve Martin's house. So that probably was a lot of details that hopefully are very as interesting to you guys as it is to me as a fan of this film. But for somebody that loves this movie so much, to know all the different ways that it could have went horribly wrong, and this movie could have been a giant jumbled mess, could have been this incoherent, self-indulgent 3-hour, travesty on John Hughes's record as a director, turns into one of the most celebrated holiday films of all time, specifically because they had an editor that knew how to work a near 4-hour film into a 90-minute classic. To me, that's fascinating. Now, I thought really hard about any element of this movie that I think could be done better. If there's something missing here, if there's something I wanted more of, if there's something I wanted less of. And this is one of those times where, like, I just can't think of anything. And I think that it's an issue sometimes that, that myself and other YouTubers, other critics, other movie reviewers sometimes find ourselves in, where you feel like you have to have something negative to say or something mixed to say. You have to have some critique. And so you go seeking for it, or you watch a movie trying to find little things. And this is just one of those times where My experience with this film is absolutely flawless. There's nothing about this movie that I ever really want to change. For as much as, even as a fan, I've been fascinated to possibly see all these extended cuts of these scenes and these alternate cuts and the 8-minute monologues and all these other things, the ones that I have seen don't improve on the movie that I have. So the only thing that I can say that is something that doesn't 100% come together for this film, yet doesn't affect my experience whatsoever, is that I am curious how Del Griffith funds his life, because he's forced to pretty much lean on Steve Martin's finances for the majority of this film, if not the entirety of it. And yet by the end of it, you realize that he does this regularly. Like, this is his life. He's on the road 24/7. And so that's the only thing that's like a lingering question for me in regard to this movie, that if I got an answer, that would be fine. But not having an answer, it's not something that really affects the movie for me at all. So if you want to call that a mixed element, if you want to call that a critique, then fine. That's the only thing that I can pull out that maybe doesn't come 100% together for me. But this is one of those times where you have a film that I genuinely just think is a flawless classic. It gives me everything that I want from a movie like this. It's one of those movies that just genuinely makes me feel good. Like, we all have our favorite movies for multitudes of reasons why, but we have a few films that are just like absolute feel-good movies that we put on either during a holiday or watching it with a certain family member, or, you know, something that reminds us of our childhood. This is a film that just, I'm always happier by the time the credits roll than I was when I started the film. It always puts me in a better mindset. It always brings my mood up. It always makes me smile, makes me laugh. It reminds me of happiness. You know, as corny as that might sound, this is just one of those movies where the story, the characters, the joke, the heartfelt moments, the score, everything, and even knowing the story now, much more of how this thing came together, this thing is just pure joy for me, start to finish.
She's short and skinny, but she's strong. Her first baby come out sideways. She didn't scream or nothing.
Now, one last thing before we get out of here, you might have noticed I'm wearing a little bit of a different hat, and that's because I have some new designs that have been added to my merch store, 2 Carnage Candy-centric designs, one of which I'm actually wearing right now. So check the store, the merch shop right now. Both of these designs are available in t-shirts, trucker hats, beanies, mugs, crew necks, hoodies, and there's also a deal going on my merch store today through Cyber Monday, which is December 2nd. If you use the discount code MARY15, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So that is valid until December 2nd. And if you guys want to have this stuff in your hands by Christmas, be sure to order it by December 6th. So please check out those new designs. Let me know what you think of them. And I appreciate your guys' support as always. So all in all, if I have not made it clear enough, to me, this is an absolute perfect comedy. This is something that gives me everything that I go to comedies for. It's a timeless classic by 2 of my favorite comedy actors. It's something I watch every single year, and I probably will never not watch this movie on Thanksgiving. It's a part of my day. Most people you talk to who have seen it, they hail it as a comedy classic. They watch it every year as well. If you have never seen it, I highly encourage you to check it out. Even though it's past Thanksgiving now, we're still in that Thanksgiving spirit. The movie still hits just as well in December. Treat yourself and check out Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, please click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put my top 50 comedies of all time, and this is on that list. Please like, share, hit that subscribe button, and be sure to check out eWin Racing in the video description below to get yourself one of these awesome chairs for the holiday season. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.